President Reagan's budget is lashing out at Republicans on Capitol Hill. David Stockman wrote a New York Times editorial where he said the country's public debt could soon reach Greece-scale proportions. He wrote that such a high deficit makes it, quote, unseemly for the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, to insist that the nation's wealthiest taxpayers be spared even a 3 percentage point rate increase. Mitch McConnell spoke with Bloomberg Television about a half hour ago with Peter Cook, and he had this to say about Stockman's criticism.
This is the same Stockman who wrote a book trashing Ronald Reagan while he was working for Ronald Reagan. So we're not inclined to take his advice. It was bad then and it's bad now.
McConnell also weighed in on the Obama administration's attitude towards business, saying, quote, anybody in America would say this is a very anti-business administration. So for more on this showdown over taxes, I want to bring in David Stockman live on the phone, as well as our own Peter Cook, who spoke with Senator McConnell earlier on. He's also joining us in this conversation. And Mr. Stockman, clearly there is a division within the Republican Party over taxes, no less. Why are you saying we need to let those tax cuts expire?
Well, I think because we've tried to cut spending for 30 years. That's where we started with Reagan in the early 1980s. Made a small amount of progress. Within a few years, it was all rolled back. Now here we are, decades later. We haven't reformed Social Security. We haven't put a means test on the big entitlements. We haven't gotten rid of things which are really outrageous, like farm subsidies. We've continued to grow programs like federal aid to education and so forth. So what I'm saying is the Republicans have talked a good game for 30 years about cutting spending, but the record shows that they have no intention of cutting anything. We now have a $1 trillion plus deficit that is growing mushrooming every year. And it's time to put up or shut up. We can't continue to issue $100 billion of bonds every month, which we're doing, and hope that somebody somewhere in the world will buy them. This is a very dangerous policy, and I think people like McConnell, who pretend they want to cut spending and never do, and then criticize everyone else for the reluctant step that we have to take to raise revenue, are really the worst kind of politicians. The Republican Party really is an embarrassment.
Mr. Stockman, let me jump in if I could, sir. Don't you at least have to acknowledge that there is a great risk at a time of recession, a struggling U.S. economy, that a tax increase right now does pose some peril for the U.S. economy, whether the suggestion comes from Mitch McConnell or anyone else?
I don't think it does. And on the top 1%, people over $250,000 a year, is our economy so weak that if we don't borrow money in order to give them a tax break, the economy is going to fall apart? I think that's Keynesian thinking, and I don't think it's correct. We have to deal with our public debt. We have to deal with our solvency problem. If it slows down the economy, so be it, because we have a huge problem.
Mr. Stockman, their Republican argument, we heard it from Senator McConnell, a lot of those folks in that top 2%, they would argue are small business owners, the people who do the hiring for so much of the economy. Is that, again, not a concern?
I think that is a myth. The fact, though, unfortunately, is we've had a phony boom for the last 10 or 15 years due to our lax fiscal policy and due to the endless money printing at the Fed. So we've created millions of small businesses who aren't going to survive. There just isn't a need for all those construction firms that were created or all those restaurants and bars that somebody started in good faith. So the idea that somehow stimulating small business is going to save the economy is motherhood, but I just think it's not correct. And it's not a reason for cutting taxes.
For more on the showdown over taxes, I want to bring back in David Stockman. He is live on the phone from Aspen. Also, Peter Cook, who spoke with Senator Mitch McConnell, who takes the other side, is also here with us. David, you laid out with passion the problems of the economy right now and why we should let those tax cuts expire. What is your prescription, then, for fixing the economy beyond letting tax cuts expire?
Well, I think it's going to be a very difficult, long, slow recovery. We have basically had unbalanced and unsustainable policies now for several decades. We've built up a huge amount of debt on the economy, both public and private, that isn't supportable, and so we're not going to have, in my judgment, the normal, conventional business recovery. we're going to have to liquidate an awful lot of debt. We're going to have to downsize many parts of the economy that basically grew beyond sustainable levels because of easy credit to the household sector as well as too much government spending. So there isn't any easy prescription, and certainly the kind of stimulus that we've had in the past, whether from the spending side or through tax cuts, are the wrong answer. We are nearly insolvent or heading that way as a nation, and we're going to have to work our way out of this the hard way by tightening our belts and shrinking some of the excess out of this economy, as difficult as that prescription may sound.
David Stockman, it's Peter Cook again. What is your level of optimism, if you have any, about the President's Deficit Commission, that they could come up with some sort of proposal that would actually try and address these issues in a serious fashion and might actually win the approval of Congress?
Those are two parts of your question. I think there's some very good people on that commission. I think they are earnest, and they are reviewing the obvious and pretty indisputable facts of our fiscal situation. I think they'll recommend a reasonable blueprint that has both revenue increases and spending cuts and reforms to close this gigantic fiscal gap. But I think they'll be totally ignored by the Congress, because the Democrats want to cut nothing and will throw their bodies in front of the bus if necessary, and the Republicans demagogue completely the tax issue. You can't. At one point in time in history, Republicans were willing to raise taxes if all else failed. Now you have a Republican Party that turns, the tax issue into a bloody shirt and is creating, I think, an enormous amount of fear and dysfunctionality in our political system. So I have no hope that anything will be implemented from the Commission, no matter how strong its recommendations are.
All right. Thank you for your time. David Stockman, an op-ed contributor to the New York Times, for his take on the Bush tax cuts.